Hey everybody, it's Jen with Spirited Saturdays, and this week we are starting a new rotation about recovery and questions that we get asked when we say we're recovered. For me, I still like to say in recovery, just sometimes on an emotional and cognitive level, I vary in terms of vulnerability, but that's okay, and I'm working toward saying that I'm recovered. But yeah, this week we are talking about how did you recover, or for me it would be, well, how did I start? How did I work on recovery? What made you realize that you needed to recover? How did you overcome that not sick enough feeling? What kind of support did you have? Okay, so first of all, I wanted to just make the distinction between needing to get help and then choosing recovery. Those are two different things for me, because it often takes the first one to develop the second. It often takes the needing to get help, the really like getting that you need the help, but in order to then at some point down the line actually choose recovery on your own terms and your own behalf, because you desire it and you prefer it. So for me, I was bulimic and several years ago, and when I realized I couldn't live like this anymore, but I didn't want to die, and I was just living in limbo, I knew I needed to get help. And only during help was I given the chance to experience life without my eating disorder, and then I began to truly desire recovery. When I relapsed years later, I knew I needed help, but because I was surely going to die if I continued this way. I knew I needed help because I was scared, but kept doing behaviors anyway. And so that scared me. And I really didn't know if I could trust myself to do it on my own, if I could really develop any lasting willingness or ability. So I got the help because I knew I needed it. I was desperate for it, but I chose recovery during that process and have continued to develop desire and willingness over time, and after experiencing myself as a whole person without the eating disorder and actually coming to prefer that person. Also, after getting to know the many aspects of myself that I didn't even know about before the eating disorder. And so this gives me hope every day, because it makes me think, well, what will I maybe possibly find out about myself a year from now that I don't know today? I have no excuse to say that, oh, shouldn't have any hope, because a year ago I didn't know I was, going to have some really cool thing happen yesterday that might show me something about myself. It's just like it motivates me to stay in recovery, because I'm just learning new things about myself all the time, because of how open I am to the world now, and how I see it as a limitless opportunity to show me more of who I am, which is something that recovery grants you access to that. That's what I believe. So it motivates me to stay there. So in terms of getting that help, I did go to an inpatient treatment program both times, but I continued outpatient therapy and nutrition therapy afterwards. In regards to working on recovery in spite of the not sick enough feeling, so I can speak to both bulimia and anorexia about that. When I began recovery from bulimia, I had to accept that my experience of bulimia did not reflect on my body in terms of weight loss. So it was about accepting that my weight was just nothing more and nothing less than a reflection of my behaviors, but it was not the main thing. It wasn't even secondary. It was irrelevant. And I didn't get this right away. I learned this, but if you look at this from a removed perspective, you can see that weight loss, for example, from anorexia, does not make you special. And that takes a lot of power away from the eating disorder, because weight can change or stabilize according to behaviors across the board. There is no inherent power or gain or status in weight changes, nothing at all. That's an empty statement, and that's a sad statement, because people who are entrenched often tend to believe that and attach themselves to that belief and live according to that belief. And so look at it in terms of these very broad, universal, blanket statements that apply across the board. Yeah. It takes away the ties to the eating disorder, and it takes away that power, and it lessens the contingency upon changes in weight. If you just remember, you know, weight is not a marker of how sick you are, and it's really nothing more or less than a reflection of what's actually going on for you and how much you're suffering. And it doesn't gain, stabilization, maintenance, loss are symptoms, but they are not the telltale signs of sickness. They're not solely the telltale signs of sickness or how sick you are. Okay. So try coming up with things that you can tell yourself to automatically bring you down to earth. Stuff that resonates with you immediately and reflexively and kind of snaps you out of a spiral moment. I guess for me, one day I looked at a tree and I thought, a tree has weight, and weight is the gravitational pull of that tree toward the earth, and that's all it is. And I don't know, something as simple as that kind of, you know, just kind of got me out of that going down thinking. Okay, so what helped me to get rid of the not sick enough feeling was remembering that, just as an example, weight loss in anorexia, weight loss due to starvation was not unique to me. It's something that often happens to people biologically, just as weight gain can sometimes happen from starvation, and weight maintenance can happen, and weight loss from overweight to a normal weight for your frame can happen. And none of this takes away the validity of the starvation. You know, my weight was, you know, whatever my body, wherever it directed it, you know, in terms of what I was doing to it. So it just, you know, whether that meant fluctuation or loss or gain, and that can vary from one person to the next. And no matter what it is, it doesn't ever take away that person's right to get help, and it doesn't take away the validity of their illness. So yeah, I say these things because I experienced them, and I didn't listen to my therapist, and I firmly believed that I was not sick enough for many reasons, and that came at a great disadvantage to me, and I refused. I refused to see outside of that, and you know, now I can see outside of that, and I can say those things to myself and believe them, and I can say them to others and believe them, and for them as well. Yeah, the idea of not being sick enough is something that I had to disconnect from, stop associating myself with it. Okay, yeah, my behaviors and my felt inability to stop them were what led me to seek treatment ultimately. When I was anorexic, it was not my weight. Really, it was my inability to stop behaviors that were contributing to my weight, but it was not really the weight itself that led me to treatment. It was the loss of control over the behaviors. When I was bulimic, I felt I couldn't stop the behaviors, but I also had an opposing force telling me I wasn't sick enough for various reasons. And I went to treatment because I couldn't stop the behaviors, not because of my justifications to keep doing the behaviors. And I had to let that go when I chose to get help, because those justifications are endless. The eating disorder will present you with endless justifications of why, you know, it could be worse. And so what is sick enough? What qualifies a person to deem themselves sick enough? As long as that person is in the eating disorder, they have to accept at face value that they are not in a place to answer that question. I thought my sick enough in bulimia was to be anorexic, which is completely warped. I thought maybe it was to purge more. Again, warped. I thought my sick enough when restricting was to be underweight. I thought my sick enough when underweight was to be really underweight. When I was in the hospital, I felt still very far from sick enough. But then I had to remember that a big reason that, there's some that were farther or sicker into their disorders than I was because their disorder hadn't been caught and managed and tended to sooner. And that was it. I mean, that's not it. There's a ton of ambivalence, and maybe they did catch it and then they got worse again. But basically, if you let any illness go, it will progress. Eating disorders are progressive, and catching them early is positive. And that can seem completely unacceptable and completely adverse to the eating disorder's logic. But you have to remove yourself from that logic enough to say, I am sick and I have a progressive illness, and if I don't deal with it, it will get worse, and my recovery process will be that much more difficult and excruciating. And maybe a part of your eating disorder thrives on that, and I know mine did. It was twisted, and it definitely saw being sicker as better, even if it did mean more work in recovery, or it still had that belief and that distortion. But you have to work really hard to get yourself out of that, and you have to hear those opposing messages as much as possible during that critical time when the eating disorder is doing its best to wholly convince you otherwise. And so please know this. If you are sick at all, you are sick enough. Okay? If you are sick at all, you are sick enough to get help right now. It's an irrelevant term, sick enough, because when you have an eating disorder, your priorities are warped. You don't have to earn recovery. You get to enter recovery at any time. That's the beauty of being able to choose recovery. There is no marker for how sick you have to consider yourself. Part of recovery is disowning that not sick enough criteria and completely banning it from your vocabulary. So those things are what helped me, and I'm going to go ahead and post this now. I hope that helped, and I will see you next week. Okay, take care.